All right, we're officially recording.
Yes.
This part is going to be recorded. I'm going to send this to my professor. Hello, professor. For my professor's sake, for some background, my friend who's very far away, at least 6 feet, don't worry about him.
Definitely at least 6 feet.
He streams on Twitch, and I'm hijacking his channel so that we can use his stream setup to record this, because it's got nice mics and cameras and stuff. And I also decided we have his like stream chat. So all the people, like, we're live streaming this, right? So all the people watching, like a lot of friends of ours or fans of the channel, they're also here. And so I may at certain points we might be responding to people in chat about if they have questions about this to keep conversation flowing, like just a Capricorn of knowledge, right?
A Capricorn?
Yeah.
Is it cornucopia?
Oh, that's what I'm thinking of.
Capricorn? That's an astrological sign. Yes.
Damn it. Capricorn. Wait, which one's Capricorn?
A Sagittarius of information.
Wait, what is a Capricorn? Like, what is the thing?
Oh, I have no idea.
God dang it! Like,
I am so not involved in astrology.
I need to know what a Capricorn is.
You look up what a Capricorn is.
I don't want to.
What is a Sagittarius? It sounds like a horse. No, that's Secretariat. Oh, definitely on topic.
Capricorn is like a goat with a fish tail.
Okay, sure, that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know, dude. It's fine.
It's better than Secretariat.
I wanted cornucopia. That's the word that my brain wanted, but it couldn't find it in time. It found Capricorn first, and they just sound similar enough.
But it will be a cornucopia
Of knowledge, yes. Yeah, we don't. Yeah, nothing to do with astrology. We were talking about knowledge here.
Oh.
So, you want to pull up or I guess you don't have to pull it up. Again, to my professor, I have put together a list of all the things that we've talked about, and I was going to let other people, namely him, decide what we're going to talk about, in what order, and we might not get to all of them.
Might not.
Yeah. So,
which one do we just want to start here then?
We can.
With ab?
Yeah, we can start with ab.
Here, let me see if I can make the text a little bigger without covering it with a camera. Okay.
There we go.
That's a little more legible, I think. All right.
This must sound so smart to the prof.
Does it?
I could have prepared more for this. I chose not to. I was like, you know what? I'll just put together.
Well, I think
I've got links to all the articles. I want to see what other people want to know.
Well, I think it helps show like that you've internalized information when you're able to talk about it conversationally without preparing too much.
Right.
I don't know.
Maybe that's why this as an exam is so genius.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty smart. All right. So what do you want to say about this?
So we just started talking about this. So synesthesia, for those who may be unfamiliar, synesthesia is a condition that I want to say it's somewhat uncommon, where people will associate sensory experience with a sensory input that is, in normal people, completely unrelated. So you might and that can be weird, right? A lot of the articles we have are the weird cases, but a very common one is like whenever you read a letter or a number, it has a color to it. You're like, oh, it's like H's are green. And people are like, what makes them green? And you're like, I look at them and they're green.
Like they actually have visual input that letter is green.
Yeah, they actually see letters as being colored.
Right, like it's not just like a subconscious relation. Like literally they see it as the color.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And then seeing like musical notes as certain colors is pretty common amongst synesthesia people. Not synesthesia itself.
Is that
Yeah,
what the word would be?
I believe so. Synesthesia itself, not that common, but the more common forms of it is something, usually stuff like that. Sometimes it'll be like flavors are associated with sounds or colors.
Okay.
And there's all sorts of things like that. And so this article, we started talking about it before the stream and then cut it all off, right? Because we were like, oh, we got to talk about this on stream.
Yeah, I asked some question. He's like, well, I will answer that on stream.
And so this is about a person, AB. It's in psychology. They usually just use initials to protect the identities and whatever. Because, like, I don't know, privacy or something.
Sure, something like that. HIPAA and stuff.
Yeah, so when she hears sounds, like, mostly, I think music, you want to scroll down a little bit.
For sure.
Yeah, so she saw colors with musical notes. Higher pitched ones, pastel, lower ones, more solid. And you would ask, because there's a line somewhere in here where that's like, oh, she can see colors that don't really exist.
Yeah.
You're like, is that real or is that clickbait? That's super real.
Oh.
Yeah, people will see colors and they're like, it's unclear.
Okay.
So like when you may have heard before that, like, oh, you can't dream of things, or you can't imagine things
that you haven't
never
already seen.
Actually
yeah.
seen. Your brain is just using
experience and
experiences that you've had to try and replicate a sort of mental picture for you, right? But with synesthesia, you're not imagining things. It's literally
sensory
as
input.
Right. And so people will see colors and they're like, I don't know how to describe it. It does not look like an actual color.
Okay.
We actually had a person in our class who has a similar music synesthesia, who, for certain notes, he says it's like it's metallic and transparent at the same time, and it's like almost a teal color, but he can't. But that's not quite right. But that's the best he can do to describe it.
Okay. And I guess that is hard because there's like that whole thing about like try to describe a color without using the name of the color.
Yeah.
And like you can't, it's really hard to do. You can say it's warm or that it is vibrant. You can use these words, but they don't really carry the weight that the color itself does.
Yeah. There's an article that we have that's about that.
Oh, okay, cool.
That is a topic that we can delve further into should we wish to do that.
Okay, I have a question though.
Yeah.
Now does synesthesia almost always involve color? Because I feel like I hear a lot of the time that it's like when I smell something there's a color, or when I taste something there's a color, but it's rare that I hear somebody say like, yeah, when I see something I taste it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Colors are very, very common, but there are weirder ones. And
so I watched a documentary once on a guy who saw math everywhere, basically. So like he would look at an object and he could see like lines and angles and all kinds of things just working their way, almost moving visually.
Yeah, I think we actually
would that
about
count
him.
as synesthesia?
Yeah, we talked about. I think we talked about him in class.
But those are like the super unique
with
cases.
Yeah, those are super unique cases.
Okay.
Most of the common ones are like sound color, letters color. There's like name color. So like if you have a name, so we're like, oh, that name is this color.
So it's not like related to people. It's just the name itself.
Yeah, just names.
Okay.
So like all people named Clay would have a specific that name.
Okay.
Actually, one of my bosses used to have this.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and they said that actually Clay did not have a color because clay is like an object and it has like
Oh, so since it doesn't like register as a name immediately, it doesn't.
right. Well, no, it's more just that like clay, she already associated it with color, right? So she explained like if your name is like Rose, I'm just gonna like it doesn't trigger anything. I just think of the color like a rose, right?
Yeah.
It only works with colors that are totally not, or names that don't have any preconceived color already attached to them.
Okay. And so I guess I was kind of understanding synesthesia wrong for a long time, maybe, because in my head, the way that I had understood it was like they're not like visually experiencing things. It's just like they see something and it has a relation in their head and they can name it off, but like it's the same relation every time, but it's as if they're actually seeing these things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, on that note, do you actually want to switch over to the woman who sees time as a hula hoop?
Oh, absolutely. Because that sounds weird and interesting.
Yeah, this one is a really good example of just how real those images are.
Okay.
So with this person, here, actually, let me double check. There were two people that they talked about. If you want to just kind of
scroll down.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, so this person, so whenever you talk when people talk about or she talks about or thinks about time like days of the month, right, or months of the year.
Okay.
She sees a calendar and it goes in a circle around her.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You mentioned
around.
This the other day.
Yeah. And so and they're pretty consistent, right? So like December is always here or something like that, right?
So like a positional relation.
Right. And there's another person who has a similar thing, I think, in this article, but I forget how exactly hers is set up. I mentioned that because there's one test that, and I don't remember if it was hula hoop person or another person who had like a slightly different setup for theirs. But they wanted to see like how much this is just imagining or how much it really worked like input, right?
Okay.
And so what they did is they ran like tests where they were like, okay, well, can you like name all the months backwards or name all the months but only every other month?
Oh, and they because they felt like they actually had that sensory input, they could literally just look at each.
Yeah. And so compared to people who didn't have any kind of synesthesia, they perform nearly twice as well on all these tasks.
Wow, okay.
It's literally as if you were looking at it. Whereas like you can try and be like, I'm going to imagine a calendar, right? But that's not going to help you
name every other one. No, you still need to go through that list in your head.
Yeah. And there's specifically for the hula hoop one, I believe, there's and this is just like her testimony, right?
Okay.
So like
right. I mean, that's all we can really get.
Yeah, they're taking her word for it. But there are certain optical illusions you can do. And I forget exactly how they're set up, but you look at something and it's got like some
dot in the center. Is it one of them?
It might. Yeah, kind of like a dot in the center. And it's got some kind of swirly design or something. I forget exactly what it looks like. But you look at it for a second, and then you look at something else, and it looks warped.
Yes.
Yeah. So she reported that when she does this, her calendar looks warped.
Whoa. So it's really visual input.
Literally her brain thinks that there is something out there, and it is in her visual field so strongly that things like optical illusions affect it. Right?
That's crazy.
Yeah, and that could be her brain like correcting for it, right? Because there isn't literally a calendar out there.
Right. Like she can see through it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to obstruct her ability to drive and walk around the house.
That's also really interesting.
Does it?
Not for her, but there's another one that we'll get into that's really interesting. That's like really difficult to grasp. Actually, we can switch to that one now. There's
Which
really
one
not
is
much.
it?
This is that second one. What it's like to see ideas as shapes.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
this one is about a person who went the ideas, and I don't know exactly. Like I forget if they try and define what an idea counts as or not, or if they just kind of leave it as idea, and you have to guess what counts or not.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, ideas to him, like when he's thinking of an idea or someone's telling him an idea, again, whatever that happens to mean.
Yeah.
He sees like almost a 3D scatter point graph.
Okay.
In real space.
Okay.
And it's like a 3D object that like once he's seeing it, if he moves around, he can see it like
actually look around it.
In 3 dimensions. So like this little story that they start off with in the article, it's a friend of his talking to him, and this guy is like venting about a girl, and he was consoling him.
Okay.
And in the middle of their talk, this guy gets up while his friend's still talking. He gets up and climbs on a rock and is like kind of looking down. He's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I just want a better angle of your ideas. I want a better view of what you're saying."
Bro, if somebody did that, that would be such like a what?
Yeah, I'd be like, are you?
I'm gonna go talk to somebody else. Thanks for listening. Like,
it's like, dude, are you okay? Are you like on drugs right now? Like, no, but it's crazy, and it's like it's hard to imagine. Like, the description they give is just like it just looks like a scatter plot graph, but it's a 3D object, right?
Right.
It's like I vaguely imagine that, but I'm not positive as to what that means. But like, does he do something with that information?
Well, that's my question. Is like, so if the ideas are taking some weird geometrical amoebic shape, does that help him in any way? Like, if he looks at one side of it, is he seeing that idea or whatever, those specific details, and then when he looks from above, he can think of these specific details?
Yeah.
But can he process the back side of these ideas while staring at the front side of these ideas?
Well, it seems like it helps him think about stuff to get literally a different perspective on it, like a different point of view. That's like why in that story he's climbing on top of the rock because he wants a different point of view. To me, I don't know how this translates into like concepts.
Yeah.
Like, what is this shape doing for you in your mental process? But for him, that's just how he thinks, and he's like, I don't know. It's just that's what ideas are.
Right. It's hard to
me.
Describe when it's just how you work.
Right. It's like trying to describe. I think you actually may have had this conversation with someone on Twitter a while back. Actually, talking about like
I know what you mean.
Inner monologues versus like inner representations of things. We had that conversation in class. It was a bit related
okay, so
to
that's
this.
actually a thing.
Yeah, it seems like there are certain people who can very vividly imagine objects in great detail, and certain people who
I can do that. Yeah,
and I cannot do that.
Okay.
And then I don't think that these two people necessarily can't also be the same person, but it tends to be that you're either very far in that camp or you're very far in like the inner monologue camp, where thinking to you is like a little voice in your head, right? And then you talk to people that are like, you don't have a little voice in your head. How do you think? And they're like, I don't know.
Right.
What are
like
you talking about? or like when I read, I'm reading stuff out loud to myself in my head.
See, that's interesting to me because if I imagine an apple, I can see, like I can walk around that apple in 3D space. I can see how shiny it is. I can see it's red. I could, if I imagined a bite out of it, I can see how thin the skin is, and I can imagine the texture. Like, I'm very, very visual. But I also have a constant voice in my head.
Yeah.
There's always that inner monologue. And so when I saw that Twitter thing that was like, you either have an inner monologue or you imagine ideas as like just ideas, they're just fully fleshed out, like amorphous things. I was like, that doesn't make any sense to me, that somebody can only do one or that you can't do both.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, there are people who can do both, and there are people who do both, but neither to a very strong degree.
Sure.
Like some people might be able to imagine objects fairly clearly and have a fairly persistent inner monologue, but not either to a great extreme, right? But there are definitely people who very nearly exclusively have one or the other.
Okay.
And I'm not quite over in that has no visual representation of things, but it's not great. I don't have an inner when I imagine objects and stuff, I mostly just get a feeling for what it's like.
Okay.
But not a picture of it. So it's it gives me this vibe. But not I can't pick out the details.
Sure.
Once I start trying to fill in details, I'm going back to a monologue. So I'm it's I'm cataloging details.
Okay.
I'm saying oh, the apple's very shiny, it's got a bite out of it, but I'm not seeing it.
Okay.
As well as some other people do.
Okay.
But and this guy apparently just sees stuff that's
right, actually as visual input.
As an object in his 3D space.
So, and if he's standing up on a rock to see from the top of it, can he still see through the object? Or does it actually obstruct his vision?
I don't know that it always does, but it can. So he talks about, in this article, they talk about how he sometimes, he gets real, if it's usually when something's really bothering him. He can get so worked up about an idea or about when you're really stressed about something, you're really fixated on it and you cannot get it out of your head. There are times where he has to, if he's driving home, he has to pull over and call somebody to take him home because he can't see the road anymore. There's this idea geometry is obstructing his view so much that he cannot drive safely.
Well, one of the things that interests, or that I guess is strange about that then, is his objects are both fixed in space and they can follow him then. Because if he's standing up on a rock, that means it is in a fixed position. He could turn around, it would not be in front of him anymore. He can jump up on a rock, he can see the top of it, but yet if he's driving and he's really struggling with something, it stays center of his vision.
Yeah, they don't go into a lot of detail about how that looks like. Does it look like there's one object in space in front of you? Does it kind of move a little bit, but then it might just be it stays fixed in relation to the car, but not what's outside of the car. So that gets into relative motion and how motion's
and I guess
perceived.
that's not what we're.
Yeah, and that could go on a tangent about how that affects Descartes' theory of motion, but that's not part of my exam. So Descartes was whack. Anyway,
You never miss an opportunity to slam Descartes.
He's just wrong about so many things.
Okay.
His biggest accomplishment was proving Aristotle was wrong about everything, and I actually like Aristotle's stuff a lot. So
sure.
I have some beefs.
You've got a grudge, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not Aristotle's metaphysics, but
No, you're
none of this
wrong
has
about
any-
them.
yeah, nothing to do with psychology or perception.
Mhm. Yee.
Yeah, so that
Back to synesthesia.
back to synesthesia. Yeah, that's most of it, I guess.
That's that guy.
Yeah.
Okay. Who else do we have in here then? Like the
just
do I
these-
have exploding head syndrome?
Oh yeah, we just opened that up for
Oh
to-
right, we
to-
wanted to test
check,
the
yeah. that has nothing to do with synesthesia. Exploding head syndrome is its own thing.
Oh okay.
To me, it's kind of one of the more boring ones that we went over, unless you have it, and then it's like
So right. So without even looking at the article, is that just like when is it? For example, would it be a really loud inner monologue, like you're just being like sensory overload, but it's all coming from in here?
Almost at very close.
Okay.
So it's somewhat more specific than that.
Okay.
So what it is as you're falling asleep, and it's almost always like literally while you're going to sleep, you're in that like in between phase, drifting off to sleep,
Oh yeah.
and then all of a sudden you hear a
Loud
extremely
noise.
loud bang.
Yeah.
It's been described as a gunshot, as a cannon, as a bomb,
Mhm.
as like a book falling off a bookshelf and hitting the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think an engine misfiring or something.
Okay.
Like it's been described as all sorts of these things, but they're all just like boom, like real
Right.
bassy,
Like a loud,
thuds,
cracky-
yeah, loud, and it startles you awake, and then you might look like, especially if you don't know what this is, you might look around for like, oh, what happened? Is there a man in my house with a gun? Did a book fall
Right.
over? Are we being bombed? Are we at war? Like, what's happening?
Mhm.
You're gonna find no evidence of anything weird, so you're gonna try and go back to sleep, and then it happens again, and it almost always happens several times in a row.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is this like every night, or is this
No.
every once in a while?
It's usually every once in a while.
Usually?
Usually.
Do some people get this every night?
I haven't heard of any specific cases of that, but
Okay.
I'm not ruling it out.
Okay.
But generally, especially for people who like know what it is, because like the scary part about it usually is that you probably have no idea what it is.
Mhm.
Like it's not like everybody
You haven't
learns
heard of
about
it,
it.
yeah.
I'm learning about it in like a psych elective class that like nobody needs to take.
Right. In your 20s. Like,
Yeah.
imagine living 20 years and not knowing what this was.
Yeah, and so all of a sudden you're trying to go to sleep and it's just bang, and you're like, whoa, what happened?
Mhm.
And then you look around, nothing. So you go back to sleep, except right before you fall asleep, bang, it happens again. And this just happened several
Right,
times
like
in a
you
row.
just think your house is haunted at that point.
Yeah, like am I insane? Is someone out to get me? Is someone playing a joke? Like you don't know,
Mhm.
and that's terrifying.
Yeah.
But once you know what it is, it's a lot easier to, I guess, calm down from it,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
Sure.
Um,
What's like causing the sound then?
nobody knows.
Really?
Yeah, we just
Like we just think that, like, as far as we know, it's just when you're in between wake and sleep, something happens and there's a bang and we don't know why.
Yeah, and it's all in your head.
Right.
Like, it sounds like there's
Like,
a thunderous
Right.
noise, and it sounds like it's coming from outside your
Sure.
head, but it's not. It's purely imagined.
right.
But
Do you know
yeah.
anything about tinnitus?
no.
Okay, tinnitus is it's a condition, and I don't know if this is physical or psychological, which is why I was going to ask if you knew. But you hear a constant ringing in your ears.
Oh, yeah, I actually do. I have heard of that.
But I don't know if it's
Last time-
physical or if it's
Last time I checked, it was. Okay, I guess I assumed it was physical. The way people
right.
have-
That's
I think Dan Bull has that actually.
he might.
Um,
Tim's dad actually has that.
Oh.
Our friend Tim. Yeah.
yeah, I remember now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I have always assumed it was physical, but
I did too,
hadn't
but
considered
I
it.
just wondered if that was something you guys had talked about, like
No,
with
we haven't
this.
talked
If
about it.
okay,
Yeah, for exploding head syndrome, there's no surefire explanation. There's a couple of theories.
okay, that's what I was gonna ask.
And I'm struggling to remember them off the top of my head. There was one where it was like micro seizures.
Oh wow,
But that one, it seems
wow.
I vaguely remember that one not actually being the case.
Okay.
Yeah, we I forget why this. I don't think this is included in my exam 2 material. But we talked about petit mal seizures at one point, which are just tiny seizures that you'll have where you'll just black out for like 1 or 2 seconds.
Okay.
And it looks like you're staring, right? And so,
but you're unconscious.
yeah, more or less. And so you'll just be looking, like, you might be looking at somebody, and then 3 seconds later, you're like, oh, there's like a skip in the conversation.
Does it feel like a time skip to you then? Like it feels like lost
time?
So
yeah, that's what that's what I remember. This was a little while ago. We talked about this.
Okay, so it doesn't even feel like, oh, I zoned out. It's like,
yeah, but it totally looks
just
like you
3
just
seconds
zoned out
later
super
to you.
hard.
Wow.
Yeah, and they're tiny seizures, and that's what causes it. And
That's
there is
wild.
a theory that that's what was causing exploding head syndrome, but I think
Okay.
that one is
It was disregarded.
yeah.
Okay.
I think they have evidence that that's not the case.
Okay.
Like,
However they tested it. Like.
yeah, I assume people have done like
Well, I
hook
bet
people up to brain
that's
scans.
what I was gonna ask. Is
and
I
then
bet seizures.
had them fall asleep, but the problem is, it doesn't happen every night.
Right.
So it, like, for a lot of people, it's like once every few months.
Mm-hmm.
It'll happen. It'll happen several times in a row on any given night, but it's like
Mhm.
you can't like schedule a doctor's appointment, go in and have them test for it.
Right. You would
then
just have to wear equipment and go to sleep
it'd be,
every
like,
single
every
night.
night for months until
Yeah.
it finally happens.
Which maybe
again.
that's what they did to
they
discredit
may have,
it.
but like that's awfully expensive.
Oh, for sure.
For a condition that's more or less completely harmless.
Mm-hmm.
The worst that'll happen is, especially if you don't know what's wrong with it, it reportedly gets worse when you're tired or anxious.
Oh,
but
and so
of
if
course,
it keeps you up and you don't understand, it just gets worse and worse
because
every
it's
time.
making you tired and anxious.
Oh no.
Yeah, but
that's awful.
Oh, it's just the worst.
I
Yeah.
can't imagine. Like the most I've had is, you know, those little auditory hallucinations you'll have between conscious and unconscious when you're trying
Yeah.
to fall asleep sometimes. Where like sometimes it 100% sounds like auditory input. Like
Yep.
you can hear your friend in your room saying your name, but like nobody is there. You didn't
Yeah.
hear anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine it feels like that, but a really loud bang. And that
Yes.
sounds awful.
Yeah. So the stage between being awake and being asleep, there's an in-between stage where you can suffer from hallucinations very easily because you're just starting to get to that dream state. For some people, you for a lot of people, this phase is super short. These are the people that are just like, oh, and they're out.
Yeah.
You know, that can just, like, their head hits the pillow and they're gone. All right, but for some people, falling asleep is quite an ordeal. And so you can spend a lot of time in this stage. I want to say this is called hypnagogia.
Okay.
But I could be wrong about that. I don't remember if I learned about it in this class. So don't dock me points for that one if I got that wrong. But yeah, you can more or less just have hallucinations. I did research on this, sort of ish. I was watching a SciSo Psych, and he mentioned it, and I was like, oh, there's a name for that. Because there was a brief period of time when I first started my job at the coffee shop that I work at, where when I was trying to fall asleep, I would start hearing my coworkers talking to me as if I would think I was at work, and I would get stressed out. And then I would that would wake me up, and then I'd be like, oh, I'm in bed sleeping, and then I'd try and go to sleep, and it would happen again. Because like once you get into that hypnagogic state, it literally
return to
feels
it?
like it's real.
Yeah.
Right. Like you can't tell.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of like like while you're dreaming,
It feels real.
It feels
yeah.
real.
You're like
And with, like,
you think you're receiving input like touch,
Yeah.
feel, taste,
and
all
so
of it.
like you occasionally do have dreams where you're like, oh, I know I'm dreaming now.
Yeah.
But a lot of dreams you have even if it's like ridiculous,
Totally fooled. Yeah.
Yeah, totally fooled till you wake up, and then you're like, oh, obviously that was a dream, and you feel
Mhm.
all better. Hypnagogia, it's essentially just that you're starting to have those dream-like like thoughts before you're completely asleep,
Mhm.
and so they feel as real as dreams, but you're not as asleep as if you're dreaming.
Right.
So it's this
You
weird
still
in
have the
between
sense yeah.
weird in between hallucination. And so I would genuinely think I was at work making coffee, and I would get stressed out because when I first started my job there, of course, you're always really stressed when you start a new job.
Right. You got to
'cause
learn
you-
everything,
yeah, you
but
gotta-
still keep up and keep your job.
Yeah,
And, yeah.
and it's like, I mean, I've been there so long now that it's like,
Second nature.
yeah, it's like, well, I worked all day by myself earlier.
Mhm.
It was not a problem.
Yeah.
But back then it was like, it's freaking me out. And so like I would get really stressed and anxious trying to fall asleep because I was hallucinating that I was at work, and then that would wake me up, and then I'd be like, oh, I'm actually in bed.
Right.
And then I'd try and go back to sleep. It was worst.
Mhm.
I forgot why we were talking about this.
We were talking about exploding head syndrome, and then I mentioned that it sounds
right.
similar to when you're falling asleep and you get auditory hallucinations and stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah. Exploding head syndrome to me is not the most interesting one that we've learned about.
sure.
Unless
Right. It sounds pretty basic if you compare it to a man who sees ideas in 3D space.
Yeah.
You know.
like it's conceptually not as interesting, but imagine like you don't know what this is and you
Right.
experience this, right? Like my professor for this class, forgive me if I'm incorrect, but I believe that he has exploding head syndrome.
Oh wow.
And that this is one of a few different things that led him to take such
to
an
study
interest.
this field.
Yeah, in I think he was already studying psychology, but more from a clinical perspective.
Okay.
But he eventually switched over to a more research oriented teaching position.
Right.
Talking about like this class and his class on psychedelics are more or less like his wheelhouse when it comes to psychology.
Sure. Both sounds really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah,
Especially if you do have a syndrome that there's not much information on.
And and there's really not a lot of research done on it because again, it's relatively harmous.
Right.
Yeah, it's not gonna,
Like it keeps you up every 2
it
months
might
maybe.
freak you out.
Yeah.
You might I don't know, develop conspiracy theories about like the government,
Ghosts in your house. And
or like aliens or something, you know.
there's a squatter in your ceiling somewhere.
Yeah, and he just keeps like
Banging on the.
Yeah.
You're snoring too loud. Bang.
Stop that. He's just got like a dictionary that he just drops on the floor, just thunk,
And immediately goes back into hiding.
and he's like, I can't let myself be seen.
My
Scurries back
friend in the chat goes, "There's bees in your ceiling,"
That's
which is
what's
actually a thing that happened to
yes.
me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would rather there be a squatter in my ceiling dropping dictionaries.
I
than
would rather have exploding head syndrome
Than
than
have
to
bee-
live with my
bees.
ceiling being chewed through by bees one morning and my room just filling of them with me in it.
Yeah.
That was a bad day.
I would literally rather have exploding head syndrome for the rest of my life than ever have that happen to me even one time.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like the worst thing
Yeah.
ever.
Yep. I agree.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we mentioned colors
Yes.
a minute ago, and color and language about color.
Yes.
That was one of the things that we have. We have a couple of
Okay.
articles on that
Mm-hmm.
if we want to pull those up.
Yeah, let me find this Word doc here. Okay, which one in there?
It's going to be at the top.
Colors.
Go to the
Okay.
tennis balls one.
Oh, sure. We can do the tennis balls one.
Just to give people something to look at. Most of what I'm going to talk about is actually from a podcast,
Whoa.
but
That
can't
looks like
exactly,
a praying mantis.
Now, and what does that say about your personality?
Stop. Those tests are BS. They mean nothing. Anyway.
Freud was wrong?
Yes. I think that is a common thought, actually.
Yeah, technically, Rorschach tests are better than random at detecting...
So is a basic guess. Most things would be better than random.
Hold on, not for detecting most things, specifically
Detecting
suicide attempts.
Okay.
Or predicting them.
Oh, okay.
That's it. Everything else is
that might be useful.
Everything else is just normal.
Sure.
Anyway, sorry if you like Rorschach test, Professor. I don't. Anyway, let's see. You could just just scroll through
down.
this article. Sure. They spend like just
a long
time.
Just.
Oh, wait a second. This isn't the right article. This is about apophenia.
Yeah. This isn't about a tennis ball.
What? Did I?
Okay, where's the tennis ball?
I think I copied.
Yeah, you accidentally
I copied the wrong article.
This one twice.
No. Whoops. Well,
I guess they don't get anything to look at then. That's fine.
Yeah, you can pull up the dress one.
Sure.
That's more or less.
This
about
is
the
talking
same
about
thing.
the blue and blue and black dress, right?
Yeah, this one's interesting. So, just first of all, to note, the one on the right, it's easier to see.
Sure.
But you notice how, like, the very bottom of the image, the lighting's kind of dimmer, not very well lit. And then at the top of the image, it's super bright, like oversaturated. Yes. And then the one on the left, the brightness is kind of... The whole thing's super bright. Like, the whole image is brightened up. So, that's kind of important, right?
Okay.
Because that's part of how they're getting the image on the left to look white and gold and the image on the right to look blue and black.
Mm-hmm. The correct colors.
Yeah, because, like, a lot of the time, people will see them one way or the other.
Yeah.
And a lot of theory as to why this happens is actually about predictive sensory input.
Okay.
So because the lighting at the bottom and the top are so different, when you and this is gonna circle back to some exam 1 stuff about how we're all hallucinating all the time, actually. As a very, very clickbait way to put that, but a less clickbaity way to put that would be to say that hallucinations are actually just normal perceptions gone slightly awry.
Sure.
They're not actually that different from normal perception.
Yeah.
I forget if we talked about this, but in case anyone watching is like, what are you talking about? Essentially, there's a theory that's growing in popularity among neuroscientists and psychologists where sensory data, that like your mental image of the world around you, whether it be like literally images or like also like auditory and other senses as well, it's we traditionally or intuitively think of it as like we're just intaking all this information and then we run it through like the brain like processor and then it outputs this experience. But it's actually a two-way path.
Sure.
It's just as much your prediction going out as the input going in.
Okay.
And so a hallucination is just an over prediction, and it's predicting stuff that's not actually there.
Okay, that makes sense.
But in that sense, it's really not different in any fundamental way from normal perception. It's just that like your experience isn't a perfect, unfiltered representation of the world. It's a lot of work on the translation, the predicting, trying to make a guess about what's actually out there. And other words that might apply to this situation as well.
Okay.
So for the dress, part of what's happening is that when you look at an image, I mean any image really, you're not just like, oh, these are all of the colors in that order, and that's an image in my brain now.
Okay.
You're also making predictions about what you're looking at. And there's a lot of different experiments that show, like, yeah, this is kind of what's happening. Like, they'll, I don't have any handy, but there were some on that tennis ball article that I failed to get you a link to. But there's things like, there'll be like just a picture, and it's just a bunch of black and white splotches. And your brain's like, this is a bunch of black and white splotches. And then it'll flip to like a photograph, right? And you're like, oh, that's like a photo of a woman riding a horse. And then it'll flip back to those splotches, and the splotches are actually the pattern from the photo. And then when you look at it, you're like, oh, this is now, and then you see the picture, right?
Okay.
Right. The first time you don't see anything. The second time
you're primed.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And so when we talk about priming in psychology, there's actually a lot of, I guess, a pretty well-respected idea in a general sense. Like the details of it you can argue about, but for the most part, yeah, it does really seem like
there's a phenomenon.
There's very clear evidence that what you're expecting greatly influences what you experience.
Yeah.
So, or just, I mean, everyone's probably done this once or twice, where you pick up a glass, you think it's water, you take a really big swig.
Super not water.
It's not water. It's like, it might be, maybe it's Sprite, maybe it's vodka.
And for a second, it tastes awful for some reason.
And you're just like, and you're just not expecting it, and it hits you really hard, and you're like, whoa, what? And maybe you spit it out or choke or something.
Yeah.
You know? But like,
then when
if you were drinking Sprite on purpose, like there wouldn't be a
tastes
problem.
fine,
So
yeah.
you're like, what's the problem here? It's because you're expecting water and you don't get it.
It's
and that
priming,
changes how you translate what's happening, right? And so for a picture like this, at least this is a theory as to why it looks different. Your brain is correcting colors for lighting, right?
Okay.
You've seen I'm sure you've seen like an optical illusion. It's a pretty popular one where it's like, these two squares are actually the same color, gray.
Yeah.
But there's like the object that's casting a shadow. So
makes one color look darker than the other.
Yeah. So you're like, oh, this color has a shadow over it, so you see it as being lighter than it actually is because you're correcting for the shadow. Well, they're actually the same color, right? That's more or less what happens with the dress picture, is that depending, it's so ambiguous what the lighting in this room looks like that people can interpret it one of two different ways.
Sure.
And your brain will essentially, like, once you make a guess about what the lighting is like, and that will inform you about what different colors mean.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so like if everything was tinted orange, then you could still pick out a color that, if not tinted, would be blue as blue.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you make corrections for this kind of stuff all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Like in everyday life.
For sure.
Yeah. Like depending on the lighting, you're going to, like, you correct colors.
Yeah. Without even noticing you're doing it.
There might be an example of this if you scroll down. I forget if it's on this article. Oh, no, this article had a bunch of those illusions and stuff.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, actually, if you scroll down further. See, there's a
gradient.
Yeah, so the gray
Whoa,
bar.
that was weird.
Yeah, the gray bar in the middle is all one shade of gray.
Yeah.
But the bigger square is a gradient. So it is darker on one side than the other. But
the center one is all the same.
Yeah, that is all the same shade of gray.
Yeah, it just flipped for me. That was crazy.
Yeah,
it's weird.
Yeah, and that gets really, really weird because of how eyes work. But that was exam 1, and boy, that's a lot of like eye jargon that I don't know if I remember correctly.
Sure.
But essentially, part of for this this gray bar here, part of how you're deciding what color the bar is by comparing it to the color outside.
Okay.
So that's why it literally looks like that side's darker, because you're not just taking it at face value.
Yeah.
You are comparing it to what's next to it. And that is partly a brain trick, but it's partly like built into your eyes.
Oh.
Yeah,
that's really hard to escape then.
Yeah. And it's in place. It's part of how your eyes tell where edges are. Because
that makes sense.
It constantly compares what like any given spot with the spots directly next to it. I apologize, Professor. I'm gonna mess this up a little bit because this is exam 1 stuff and it's a lot of again, technical jargon. So I don't know the names of any of these neurons off the top of my head right now. But essentially, you're gonna have a bunch of rods and cones, right? Usually one or the other.
Sure.
And sometimes a rod or cone is hooked up directly to a specific neuron that then sends a signal. But sometimes a cluster of them are all hooked up to the same neuron.
Oh wow.
That sends a signal.
Okay.
Yeah, and so these clusters will give different signals depending on what portions of them are lit up or not.
Okay.
And so if you have a square and a square next to it that's a much darker shade, and it's getting most of its information from right where the line is, it's sending a different signal than if it got all this or all that.
Yeah.
It's oh, there's a difference there.
Yeah.
And so that's part of what's going on here is you're interpreting these colors differently because of the colors that are next to them.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
so it's both a priming thing, but it's also just how your eyes are built.
Yeah. If you want to scroll down a little bit more, there's one more that I have in mind. I don't remember if it's... Nope, keep going.
It's not this one, huh?
It's not the birds.
These are actually the same image.
It's not on this one. It's on the other one. Dang it. There's one where they took a picture of the same bowl of fruit in 4 different lightings.
And it looks wildly
way different, even though it's exactly the same bowl.
That's
of fruit.
Cool.
Yeah, it's really fun, but alas, it's on the article that I
messed up.
Yeah, didn't get the right link to.
Yeah.
Very cool. Anyway, yeah. So I wanted to talk about colors partly because we listened to a podcast that was really interesting regarding colors, and I can't show you a podcast on screen.
Right.
It's not much to look at, but there's the connection between color and language, because we were talking very, very briefly before we started the stream about how or we were talking about it on stream. I forget. When synesthesia came up, right? We were talking about how you might see a color, but then just really not have a good way to describe it, right?
Yes.
And that's super interesting, not just because they see a color and don't have a way to describe it, right? But also it's interesting in the sense that how you describe colors changes how you see colors.
Oh, I've heard about this. In different in different cultures, they consider like pink doesn't exist. Pink is red.
Yes, this is Russian, I believe.
Okay, yeah.
In Russian,
and so they don't
pink is light red.
Right, and so it actually influenced the way that they perceive certain color. They will look at something, and it won't necessarily look the same way to us. Is that how it works?
Yeah, so imagine you see light blue and dark blue together.
Sure.
It's oh, that's a lot of the same color.
Yes.
Just different shades.
Yeah.
But then you have pink and red next to each other, and
those are distinct
different colors.
Yeah.
But if you
to them it looks the same as blue gradient.
Yeah. So it looks like a gradient. So pink and red to them together would look like light green and dark green would to us, or light blue and dark blue.
That's interesting.
But on another twist is that light blue and dark blue have totally different names. So to them, the difference between light blue and dark blue is the difference between pink and red.
Right.
They
Because-
don't see them as being the same color.
Your whole life you've called it something different since literally before
Yeah.
grade school.
Right.
And you've seen it as a completely distinct color. So when you see it next to something that is a similar shade, you say it's a similar shade, but they're not the same color.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so and this goes like even deeper, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's and I'm not going to go into as much detail as the podcast did, most because I don't remember it, but in Homer's Iliad,
Okay.
somebody, I forget who exactly, he was doing some writing and documentation about the Iliad, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he started to notice that Homer described certain things weirdly.
Okay.
Most notably that I remember is that he described the ocean as being wine red. He's like, that's
real weird.
That's an odd
Was
color.
he colorblind?
Well, that's what they thought originally.
Huh.
But that's what he thought initially. But he did a test. He wanted to see how often he described different things using different colors. And he found that he never describes anything as being blue. Not even once.
Whoa.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, this is a pattern in a lot of Greek literature, is that they just don't have a word for blue.
Wow.
Yeah, since then, I forget I don't think it was the same guy. I think this was quite a while later.
Uh-huh.
They people have done like almost like a language retrospective, like looking at the history of a language and when certain colors entered the lexicon.
Okay, interesting.
Because as a language develops, you like, it's not like people sit down like, all right, what are we gonna call all these colors?
Yeah.
You know, they develop as they're needed.
Yeah.
And so different languages will like words appear for different colors at different times.
Sure.
But it's almost always in the same pattern. So it's
Interesting.
black and white is first.
Yes, that
Red
makes
is
sense.
next.
Okay.
And then I forget actually when yellow shows up.
Really, yellow shows up before blue.
Yeah, and then so it's black, white, red. I don't know when yellow is. Green is next.
Okay.
And it kind of makes sense. Like black and white, yeah.
That makes sense to
yeah,
be
it
the
makes
first.
sense.
Yeah.
And then red,
Red makes sense.
there's a lot of things that are really important that are red.
Yes.
Fruit, that
blood.
Poisonous animals
Uh-huh.
often use a red as a warning color. So it kind of makes sense that there's
Yeah.
going to be certain things.
Fire and
Yeah.
all
Oh, yeah,
red.
fire. I didn't even think about that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all sorts of things that are red that are important, right?
Yes,
And
sure.
language is just a tool that we use to communicate ideas. So the important ideas are going to get names first.
Right.
And I apologize. I forget when yellow shows up, but green is next, and that kind of makes sense too. If you think about plants,
Right.
there's a lot of green things.
Yeah.
Now, the importance of being able to distinguish between certain green things isn't as important. Like, so many things are green that you almost don't need to bother.
Right.
But at some point, it's going to come in handy to be able to describe what is a plant and what is a predator or something like that. Who knows?
Right. Sure.
And then blue in almost every single language they did this with, blue is last.
That is so weird to me
Yeah.
because like water is so important to us.
Right.
And boy, is that blue.
Well, to us it seems blue, but it's not inherently blue to a lot of people.
Okay.
Well, firstly, if say you live in an area where there are no large lakes or oceans, most water is going to be in a stream.
Oh, so it's
streams
gonna be
don't look blue.
like brown or clear. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, a lot of water, it will sometimes look green as well as blue.
Okay. Yeah, it's starting to make more sense now.
Yeah.
Like if you live on an ocean, then yes, you're gonna see blue, maybe a little sooner than other people.
Maybe a little sooner.
Right.
But then they find weird things where people will describe the ocean as being wine red. Like that's the color they see it as.
Wow.
And it's just because like they don't have words for blue. And this also kind of, if you don't think too much about water specifically, because that's just like the weird way light reflects, and water can end up being so many different colors.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
But blue is a really rare color in the natural world. Almost nothing is blue.
Yeah.
Right? This is to the point where certain cultures, upon finding certain gemstones like sapphires or lapis, they thought they were magical and they're sacred
because they're blue.
Because they're blue. They don't have. Like,
oh yeah, that must be like otherworldly.
Yeah, they're like this. Nothing looks like
right.
This.
It has a quality that nothing else has ever had.
We don't have a name. We don't know how to describe this.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
But then, so in the podcast, of course, and I'm quoting the podcast. One was like, "Wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. What about the fucking sky?"
Okay.
It's like, oh, okay. You got
all
a
right.
point. Okay,
yeah.
Interesting. And this is part of what reason why royalty used purple. Kind of.
Yeah, you couldn't find purple in nature, so it was a sign. It was a status symbol to be able to create it.
Yeah, that's
because it was an expensive color. So if you could afford purple, you were probably royalty or nobility at least.
It was very hard to create purple dye.
Yes, because you need blue.
Yeah, but it wasn't magical. The way that blue is, that certain cultures revered blue stones as literally being like magic or from like heaven or something. I don't know, but like literally like, oh, this has magical powers.
Sure.
So the sky gets weird, right? There's a lot of cultures that don't have words for blue. And if you like, what color's the sky, right?
It's just the sky to them.
Yeah, they're like,
they don't necessarily even give it a color. When they look up, it's just sky.
Sometimes it's described as like gray.
Interesting.
They're like, oh, it's just gray. Yeah.
Clouds and
yeah. I don't
know.
There's an experiment in particular that somebody did that makes it really. I say experiment, and then I'm going to say they did it on their daughter. And that's going to make it sound really bad. It was like a social experiment, you know, not like literally
like a prank.
More, yeah. Not like it wasn't like a lab experiment.
Yeah.
He just so like a pseudo experiment that he did what he did with his daughter is he would because with these cultures they didn't have a word for blue. He was like, how do you look at the sky and not realize that this is a radically different color than everything else?
Sure.
And then not have a name for it. Or at least like, oh yeah, I never thought about that. That's definitely not gray or green or white.
Wine red.
Or wine red. Yeah. No, they're like, oh, it's this. And they're like, what? No, it's blue. You know? So he wanted to see what somebody who had never been told the sky is blue would think the sky is. So with his daughter, he she's like extremely young, right? So as she's growing up, he is teaching her colors and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is red, this is blue, and he taught her blue.
But never taught her that the sky is blue.
Right. And he did this for a while, right? And so he'd be like, what color is this? And she'd be like, that's red. And he'd be like, what color is this? Oh, that's blue. Okay. So eventually he decides one fateful day he's going to test her. So they're outside, they're playing the color game. Eventually he's like, what color's that? What color's the sky? And she's just like, what are you talking about? Like, she doesn't understand what he's asking. He's like, the sky.
Doesn't
what
assign
color
it a color
is it?
At all.
And she's like, what? And she just starts getting frustrated because she's like, what do you mean? Like, she just doesn't get it. Like, we look at the sky, it's blue, but she's like, and she has the word blue.
Right. She's just like, it's sky.
Yeah. Or like,
that's so crazy.
She eventually like after pressing her for an answer for a minute, she
Mhm.
said, "It's kind of white or gray, I guess." Like, didn't even assign it the color blue when she finally did decide. And so, yeah, it just kind of got him thinking, like, damn, is this guy actually blue? And
See, now I'm thinking about it.
yeah, it's like, what? And this relates somewhat to the tennis ball article that I didn't get you properly. But one of they talk about in that article for a brief moment about how a lot of the time how the color you perceive something as isn't so much the color that you're getting from your sensory input. It's the color that's important to you, right? So think about bananas. What color is a banana? Well, it's yellow, but like it's also green when it's not ripe, and it's brown when it's overripe. But no one ever says that bananas are green, yellow, brown sometimes.
Right.
No, it's always they're yellow.
Yes.
It's like that's because that's the important
that's
color.
the one you eat.
Yeah. And so somebody who is taught that the sky is blue might be more apt to see the sky as being blue.
Right.
Because that's what they know. They're looking up at the sky and expecting it to be blue.
You are primed.
You're primed to see it as being blue. But then somebody who's never encountered this before might just
call it white or gray.
Yeah, it's like there's so
during sunset it might even be red. Like
and it's
but we were just taught that the important one was blue.
Right.
Weird.
Yeah, it's quite bizarre. And the thing to me, and I don't have an answer for this. I don't remember any of the articles or podcasts or whatnot having a great explanation of why this is the case. But it's odd to me that in certain cases, like with the ocean or the sky, it's like you either assign it a different color or have no idea what the question is because you're not primed, or you don't have the word for the color blue, so you literally don't see it in the sky. But then at the same time, there are cultures that, because they don't have a word for blue, will look at lapis and be like, whoa, what is this?
Yeah.
So it's like sometimes the color is just so obvious that even without the language for it, the experience is immediate. And other times it's almost created by language, like that experience.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and I don't know what separates those two things. I mean, the sky and like water, it's, you know, it's only very loosely these colors, because like with the ocean, it's just refracting light back at you, and the sky, it's kind of the same deal with the atmosphere. They're not like
blue is all
objects
that's left,
that you can like pick up and look at in different lighting, right? Whereas like if you had a blue rock, maybe that's what it takes to really get to you that blue is a unique color.
Sure.
You know, that you can then recognize in these more ambiguous scenarios.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's really cool. And like it actually kind of reminds me of the conversation we had earlier about people seeing colors that weren't real.
Yeah.
Because it's like, yeah, how are they're having an experience of a thing that we can't have the experience for, so we can't even imagine what that's like. Just like with the sky, where it's like we look up and we're primed to think it's blue, and so we see it as blue, but somebody who sees it for the first time, not having been primed that, hey, this is blue, is going to be like, it's a color, I guess. That's interesting.
And there's something about the synesthetic experience that is like looking at the sapphire gem.
Yeah.
That it's so immediate that you know that this is different.
But you can't.
Even without the name for it.
Right.
The words for it. Versus the more ambiguous ones where it's like you see the sky differently depending on what colors you're told it is. You know,
that's so interesting that there's like an in and out.
Yeah, like it's not entirely consistent how the language color relationship even works. And you would have to think like, yeah, to some extent that has to be the case, because if you had no words but you needed words to see color, you'd never be able to develop words because you'd never see it.
Yes.
You have to see it then to develop the words. But there are some scenarios in which having the words then also affects
it's a
how
give
you
and
see
take.
It. Yeah, it works both ways almost.
That's interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah. We're kind of over time a little bit.
Yeah.
There's a couple of other things that I wanted to touch on, a couple related to color, and then there's one topic we didn't get to. I didn't want to necessarily get to all of them, but I kind of wanted to get to this one specifically.
Okay.
Are you good talking for a little bit longer? Cool. Professor, if you have too much to do, you can consider this the end of my exam podcast. Take it as it is. But if you're like super bored and quarantined and have nothing better to do, you can keep listening. I just a couple more things I wanted to share with everybody. One of them was relating to colors. No, I spent too much time talking about this stuff and I don't remember it.
The really important one about colors.
Yeah, colors and language and such.
Yeah, and that it's a give and take, and
it came to me after synesthesia.
Okay.
Heck.
Now I can't say it.
Dang it.
Synesthesia. Help. I can't say the word now.
No. Synesthesia.
Thank you.
Yes.
Synesthesia. I did it.
Oh, I was going to talk about people with 4 cones.
Oh, okay.
Because this shit gets weird. So, and this is... They talked about this a little bit on the podcast. I've also read about this elsewhere, and the stuff I've read might be more recent than the podcast. So I might sound like I'm more sure of stuff that they said in the podcast, and I might be wrong.
Okay.
But luckily, I already said that the cutoff point for the exam was there. So, like, if I'm super wrong, don't dock points, please. So the color spectrum that we can see, right? This is affected by the number of cones that we have in our eyes, right?
Oh, it totally is.
Because
you have like peacocks and stuff that see a whole array of colors we can't see.
Yeah. Mantis shrimp have...
Oh my gosh, they have ridiculous...
16 different cones, I believe. So they just see like a whole fucking rainbow.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we can also see a rainbow, but there's this...
Like a rainbow of rainbows.
Yeah. It's nuts. But we've got the blue, red, green.
Yeah, the 3.
Yeah.
RGB.
Yeah. And
our blue, the green, and red.
Yes. So that kind of limits what
we're able to...
what colors we can see.
Okay.
But it had been discovered a while back that there are about roughly 1 in 10 women actually have 4 different cones.
That's a really high number.
A surprisingly high number, yes. Now here's the weird thing. So hypothetically, right? So with 3 cones, like if you've ever messed with a color editor and the one that uses like the red, blue, green sliders, and then you put all 3 sliders where you want, and it gives you a color, right? Like that's essentially how your range of colors works. It's like how much of each like
primary
are we getting, or like maybe there's the waves are somewhere in between 2 colors or something like that. But like it's all from these 3 different cones.
Sure.
And so your roughly the number of colors you see, like from going from 2 combinations to 3 possible combinations, it is like, it's similar to like if you had like how many possible combinations of 2 versus how many possible combinations of 3. Right. It's like, oh, the number jumps.
Oh yeah, exponentially.
So from 3 to 4, it also jumps. Like, just explodes.
Sure.
So you would think, based on this logic, that people with 4 cones can see millions more colors than people with 3 cones can. But it turns out the reason this took so long to discover is that people...
It's not that different.
Yeah, well, people with 4 cones oftentimes have just no idea.
Sure.
Just no clue. And the reason for this is largely language. At least that's one of the suspicions, right?
Yeah, they don't have words to describe the colors they can see that we can't.
Right. Well, that's kind of part of it. But remember, the synesthete can also, they can see colors, but they have no words for it.
They won't even, So
they're like, oh, I see a color, but I can't describe it.
Yeah.
So the case with the 4 cones is a little bit different. Because the synesthete, or rather any normal person really, is going to grow up and you're going to be like, what color is this? Is orange. You're going to play the color game that one guy was playing with his daughter to totally dunk on her and to not know what color the sky was. Stupid child.
Yeah.
Learn to see. And so you're like, what color is this? It's red. What color is this? It's blue. And, you're going to have those petty arguments about, like, whether this is actually green or blue when it's so it's like seafoam blue-green that's, like, totally in between. People are like, it's totally... That's what, like, half of the tennis ball article is. It's like, a tennis ball is green or yellow, and it's, like, 50% of the article. And I'm not going to lie, it was a bit to wade through. The official color for tennis balls is yellow.
They are green.
Right. So, like, there's this debate that happens, and it's him cataloging the story about how his whole office went to war over this.
Okay.
And then it gets interesting after that because he starts, like, actually talking to people about, like, the science behind it and all that. And that's where it's like, that's, like, the most important... Because think about tennis balls, right?
Yeah.
Like... You think of a classic tennis ball, it's like a yellow greenish color, like almost a highlighter color.
Sure.
But then you can also get them that are like white or pink or blue. Like, you can get tennis balls in every color, but which one is tennis balls? It's whichever one's most important, right?
Yeah.
So that's where that came up from. Turns out the official color for tennis balls was yellow.
Interesting.
A lot of them are like highlighter green or a color in between, but the official color is yellow.
Interesting.
Anyway, so when you grow up, you learn about colors, right? And this is how you learn, like, and that gets into like a really weird topic. Like, how do you learn words for your internal experience when you cannot directly compare them to somebody else's internal experience, right? So, like, how do you learn that what you're feeling is pain? Right, it's weird.
It hurts.
Right, but, like, how do you learn to describe it like that?
You watch other people.
Right, but you don't know that what they're experiencing is pain. You just know how they're behaving.
Yeah. And you just assume?
And you more or less, you just through empathy and then also like your behavior, your own behavior, you associate your own behavior with these feelings. You see other people perform the behavior and assume they have the same feelings.
Sure.
You notice that people describe these things as being in pain, and you make pretty good assumptions about all of these things, right? You grow up into a workable definition of the word pain that you can say, and everyone knows what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's a very Wittgensteinian idea where he would say that you and I technically will never know that what we experience when we say we're in pain is even the same thing.
Sure.
We could have the same word for totally different experiences,
Mm-hmm.
but because the behavior is similar enough, it never comes up.
Sure.
Now, color is an experience. It's just your mental image of what's out there in the world.
Yeah.
So how do you learn that something is blue? Well, somebody shows you an object, like
And they
your
say
parents or
blue.
like nursery, and you're like, blue.
Yeah.
And you're like, blue. And you're like, very good. Man, accomplishment's easy when you're a baby.
I was just gonna say, man, I wish I could get praised that easily nowadays.
Right? Yeah, babies have it easy. All they have to do is identify colors, and everyone's like, "Oh my gosh!"
He's a genius.
Don't even get started. When they start walking, people are like, "Holy shit! He can use his legs now." Yeah, and so imagine you technically see millions more colors than everybody else, and you've got, like, say you have 20 balls, and they all look different to you, and then as you're growing up, people pick up every single one of those balls and like, this ball is red. This ball's also red. Like, this entire spectrum of colors
becomes red.
is red now.
Wow.
And eventually, that's just how you see things.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter that you have all these extra cones. You don't know how to use them, right? It's the same as
That's insane.
like thinking about like the Russian language we were talking about earlier. Like pink and red literally look like different colors, whereas blue and light blue look the same.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's more or less the same thing. When you have 4 cones and you're seeing a wider array of colors, they get assimilated into the same color because they all get assigned the same names.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, because with the synesthete, they're getting this new experience.
Yeah.
And they're like, this isn't like anything I've been told about before.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were born with 4 cones, everything is being taught. Like, that's how you learn language, with that already in mind, right?
Uh-huh.
So it's not a radical new experience. It's just how everything looks already.
Mm-hmm.
And you're being taught what to call things that look a certain way.
Mm-hmm. And then that primes you for how you see it the rest of your life.
Yeah. So there's a really
That's interesting.
yeah, there's a very, very interesting experiment that they did on monkeys.
Mm-hmm.
Now, monkeys have only 2 cones.
Mm-hmm.
They have I forget which 2. No, I don't forget. They have the green and the blue one, but they do not have the red one.
Oh, okay.
All right, so they can see blue and green things, but not red things.
Mm-hmm. Not much of a need to.
Yeah, I mean, not really. And so they set up an experiment related to cones, right?
Mm-hmm.
To try and like get more information on that question of like, do these people literally see more colors but just call them different, or do they not know what to do with that cone information, or something in between, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so what they did with the monkeys is there's a as of right now, controversial method of gene editing.
Okay.
It's not, I would say controversial method of gene editing. All gene editing is controversial.
Yeah.
But there's a way, and I don't know the nitty gritty details. I don't know why I decided to pronounce those T's real precisely.
Uncharacteristic of our accent.
Right? Yeah, nitty gritty details. But essentially, there's a kind of virus that you can give DNA.
Yeah.
And then it
Yes,
will,
I've seen it.
yeah. A guy used it to cure himself of lactose intolerance once. I don't know if you've seen that video. I'll have to send that to you. Yeah. So lactose intolerance is a little tangent, but lactose intolerance is caused by a lack of an enzyme, right?
Yes.
You don't have you don't code for that enzyme, so you don't produce it. So what he did is he isolated the gene for creating the enzyme, gave it to the virus, put the virus in a pill, took the pill, and it assimilated it into his DNA, and his body started producing the enzyme to break
Oh
down
my
lactose,
God.
and he cured his lactose intolerance.
Oh my God.
Literally gone.
Oh my God.
He went from not being able to have milk without horrible like indigestion, right? To being able to just eat pizza with extra cheese and have no problems at all. Like, this is a thing that science can do, but the FDA is like, no, not gene editing though.
Wow.
And so, like, yeah, it's just a guy did it on YouTube and he documented the entire process. I will have to find that.
It's not illegal in any way, right? Because it's doing it to yourself.
Yeah. So he works at a lab. And
so he just used their resources with permission.
With permission, he used their equipment and filmed it, and then he only gave it to himself on camera, and so it's like there's nothing illegal about doing any of that.
Wow.
Yeah, it's nuts. But apparently this is okay to do to monkeys and not people.
Okay.
So with that exact same method I just described, they gave monkeys
a fourth cone or a third cone?
A third cone for red, using the human genome for red cones. Luckily, very compatible with monkeys. Or is it chimpanzees? I apologize to any zoology enthusiasts who are like, technically they're not monkeys because they don't have tails. I don't care what species of primate it was. It was one of those primates that they do all sorts of experiments on. Mm-hmm. Don't tell PETA. So they gave these monkeys a cone, right? Yes. And so before they had done this, they had started running this test where they showed them like a touch screen with, it's all gray with a red dot. Mm-hmm. Now, if you don't have a red cone, you can't see it because the red dot will also look gray. It's just gray, yeah. So it all looks the same to you. And monkeys who, if they could find the red dot, they would get food, right? And so using behavioralism, you should be able to train them to always hit the red dot to get food. Right. That's an easy thing to train them to do. Yeah. But you can't because they can't see it. Uh-huh. So there's no way for them to learn to identify it, right? So because it's just random. So yeah, they're doing this, and it's like, yep, these monkeys have no idea where the red dot is. Mm-hmm. So they use the virus to give them the gene for red cones.
Mm-hmm. And then they develop the cone.
And so now they have an extra cone. Now they have the red cone in their eye, right? Mm-hmm. And the monkeys still cannot find the red dot. They cannot do it.
Oh, because they didn't like ever learn how to use the cone.
Right. And so for like several weeks they did this test, and they could not find where the red dot was at first. But after several weeks, they eventually were able to pick it out every time. So it took them a while, but eventually they learned how to.
So you could theoretically do the same thing with people with 4 cones then.
Theoretically, yeah.
It might be harder since we're slightly more advanced in the whole like perception department.
Well, it also helps that we had like the monkeys had us with 3 cones to create a test that we would know. But who's going to make the test?
Somebody would have to be able to use 4 cones already.
Yeah, some like 4-coned alien comes down from space and puts together a little grid with a color
just for
on
us.
It. Yeah.
How kind.
Yeah, and they're like, all right, we've given you...
We're going to weed out all the 3-coners.
Yeah. Everyone except for roughly 1/10 of women is out.
So do no guys get the gene?
Nope.
So it is tied to that chromosome.
Yes, it's specifically because of XX versus XY chromosome.
Very interesting.
Women can have it, but men cannot.
Very interesting. Okay.
Yep.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and I forget the details about that, but yeah, I don't know. It's chromosome jargon. You guys heard about chromosomes.
Mm-hmm. Are we good to end the recording part then?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Go for it. Unless there was nothing you wanted to say.
We didn't talk about apophonia. Apophenia? Apophenia? But we don't have to talk about apophenia. I just like it. Apophenia. It's a fun word. Because like an epiphany?
Yes.
Where you suddenly realize something?
Yes.
And apophany or apophany. It's supposed to be a play on epiphany, but I forget exactly how to pronounce it correctly. It's that, except when you have a sudden realization, a light bulb moment, except what you thought of is super fucking wrong. And I just love that there's a word for that. And they talk about like a little bit about the like people with really outlandish beliefs, like conspiracy theorists and stuff like that, and like how that can develop.
Yeah. There's a whole. Oh yeah. There's a whole study of like why you end up believing those things, and it's actually just part of our nature. And so like it doesn't matter how intelligent you are.
Yo, I'm here.
You are likely to fall for them
dude,
anyway.
I just want to say my younger brother showed up an hour and a half late. We're just about done. I just wanted to out him before we ended the recording.
Well,
anyway.
Great sibling.
Yep. Anyway, so that's all I want to talk about.
Awesome.
If you stuck around for this whole thing, thank you. If you didn't stick around, you didn't have to. I already gave you that. I'm not talking to you guys. I'm talking to my professor.
You guys had to stay.
Yeah, you guys weren't allowed to leave. You weren't getting off easy. Man, I should have just not shown up. That's what I say every time. Anyway, goodbye. Hopefully this was a good enough exam. I'll see you never.